I got the movement set up, and the movement's really easy to do, so it didn't take me long. And so I was like, you know what, let's start working on the gun that you shoot projectiles with. I set up the projectiles, and normally I would have them set up so that if you shoot and the projectile hits anything, it'll automatically get destroyed. That way none of the physics get all wonky. But I was like, you know what, it'd be funny if I just didn't do that. So then I made it so the projectile would only get destroyed after a certain time of being created. And so what the effect was that it would get this weird like bouncy effect where it would just kind of skim off any other collided objects. Also, I could make it do this. And because of this, I decided that I wanted to keep it but also rework it because I wanted it to be a little more predictable instead of being this random bounce or curve. So because of this, I did a couple hours of research on how to make something bounce in Unity, and I found a solution that worked with me that wasn't too complicated to understand. The outcome of this is obviously what you're seeing on the screen now. It's a bullet that's a little easier to control and a little easier to predict to see where it's going. I added some weight to it so it's affected by gravity, so it's not a straight shot. I might have some people play around with it and see how they feel about the bullets. If they want it to be a straight shot, then I will, but I think it gives a little more fun to it if it has a little bit of a curve to the bullet. After I got the bullets to bounce, I ran into another problem. The player wouldn't flip depending on the direction of the mouse and where it was facing, which would make the gun not flip with the character. The gun would continuously be on the right. You would run into problems like the gun flipping over the character. I did some more research and maybe about an hour of fiddling with code to make it all work how I liked, and I got it to work. And to be honest, I'm still not 100% sure how it works completely. It works. That's all that matters. Now that I had the player able to shoot and move and flip with the mouse depending on where you're aiming, I decided to do something a little more easier, and this was the player's bullet count and health. This was really easy to implement. I just made an integer counter, and every time the player clicks down the mouse button to shoot, it subtracts 1. This results in a countdown from whatever number I set. In this case, it's 6. And then I make an if statement to see if the integer is below 0, and if it is, the player can't shoot. The player's health works in almost the same exact way, except the if statement is checking to see if the player has collided with a bullet, and if it has, then it subtracts 1 from the health. After that, I set up some UI to show the numbers of health and bullets that the player has, so they can actually see some visuals of it. One problem that I actually came up with against the player arm was that whenever the player would flip, the arm wouldn't flip with it as well. So that was a huge pain in the butt to try and flip the arm so that it would actually rotate the 180. I eventually wrote a script for it that I can show here, show what it looks like without the script. Now that I got all that done, I needed to work on an enemy, and since I'm lazy and I didn't want to create a different sprite for the enemy, I just took the player's sprite and made it a little darker so that it looks like it's just a bad guy. Then I made the enemies aim at the player with a little bit of an offset to account for the bullet's trajectory. And when I say accounted for the trajectory, I really just added or subtracted 15 to the angle that is being used to point at the player. It's not really calculating anything terrible at coding, so I don't even know how to account for that such things as trajectory. I just add numbers or subtract numbers where necessary. Now that I had an enemy set up, I wanted to be able to create some test rooms that a player can go in and start shooting at other enemies. The only problem is once the game started, enemies would automatically start shooting at the player, and I didn't want that to happen if the player wasn't in the room. I set up a door that would hold inputs for how many enemies are in a room. Once those enemies were no longer in the room, the door would open and the player would go into the next room. It's a little sloppy and probably needs to be reworked, but for now, I think it does the job I want it to do. And now there was one more problem with the enemies. They had a tendency to kill themselves. And no matter how much I tried to work around it and fix it, the code that told the enemies if the player was in the room, it would interfere with the code that would prevent the enemies from killing themselves. This meant that I had to rewrite the code entirely just to make it work right. It was a couple hours of frustration, but now that it works pretty dang well, and I'm happy with that. And after all that hard stuff was done, I did some easy stuff because, a lot of hard work over and over and over again can be a little straining. So I decided to add some little fancy particle effects and some sounds. These particle effects, as you can see, were a little blood splatter once the player or an enemy gets shot, and then a little gun particle effect every time the gun's shot. Little simple things to add a little flavor to the game, the visuals. I then also added some sound effects, which was the gunshot, the bounce of the bullet, and a very subtle hit sound when a player or an enemy is hit. That's about it for the current state. I want to get started working on a death screen, a pause screen, and a title screen. And after that, I want to work on some level design. But yeah, that's about it. I'm really excited about it. I really love how it's coming out. And yeah, thanks for watching and look forward to some other updates.